Good afternoon, everybody. It's Scott Drossas here, CEO of Apogee. Just delighted to have a chance to host another webinar to share with those of you out there in higher education who are interested in learning from your peers. Today we've got Sarah Waters and Mark Henderson from KU and Pitt. And the webinar is titled Residence Hall Renaissance: How IT and Housing Work Together for Student Success. So thank you so much, Sarah and Mark, for joining. You're at two big institutions there. Congratulations on being in the Final Four. Look forward to KU having some success this weekend, hopefully, and you can put up another pennant in your gym. Would you mind just real quickly introducing yourselves, and maybe Sarah could start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Scott. I'm Sarah Waters at the University of Kansas. I'm the Director of Student Housing. I've been at KU since 2017 in this director role. We are very excited about our men's basketball team in New Orleans this weekend, so rock chalk there for sure. KU's had a long-standing relationship with Apogee, almost a dozen years now that we partnered with Apogee to provide the ResNet to our on-campus housing, and we house about 5,000 students on campus. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Sarah. Mark, how about you?
Sure. Happy to be here, Scott. Thank you. I'm Mark Henderson. I'm Vice Chancellor and CIO at the University of Pittsburgh. July will herald my third year of being there. And Apogee has been a very good partner of ours. In fact, before I joined Pitt, we had begun our journey with Apogee, or we're in the process of beginning our journey. And I was very pleased to see that we were heading in this direction. And so much that being a strategic partner allows us to, kind of move a bit higher in terms of the value chain for our faculty, staff, and students. So enjoying our working relationship.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be serving Pitt as well as KU. Before we dive in, I know if you could, Spencer, advance the slides, I'll just kind of give the audience a little bit of an overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to just do a quick overview of who we are. So if some of you on the call don't know anything about us, I'll do that. We'll then move into, we really got 4 key questions for the panel today. We'll have some discussions and some follow-on questions around those topics. And then if we have time, we've structured it so we can have some Q&A at the end, depending on how things go. So a little bit about us, background. Apogee is focused on higher education exclusively. We've got over 20 years of serving higher education in over 400 institutions across the country and over 1 million students. One of the things we're really proud about is we've served some customers like Sarah for a long time, 12 years she mentioned, and we have some customers that have been with us for actually a little over 20 years. So we're proud of the fact that the colleges that we work with tend to stick with us, and we think that's probably the best reference we can have in terms of the quality of service we provide. We started our work in the residential halls, and that's really the focus of today in terms of the nature of the work we do. And over time, in managing those networks for the residences, for impacting and improving, delivering great student experience, we were asked to work across the campuses too. So what we refer to that service as managed campus, and we do a lot of different things in not just managing the networks for IT teams across the campus, but increasingly, managed applications and security and even things like IoT are starting to become part of that suite. Campus engagement references our what we call digital signage. It helps support the community and the communication strategies of campuses, colleges across their campus. And then lastly, we have a video services business that we deliver, and actually in KU, we do this as well, but we deliver video streaming and HDTV services to create an at-home like experience for the students, and as well, a lot of colleges use that capability to manage some of their own their information and messaging and programs, homegrown programs out to the students. And then increasingly wrapped around that is analytics, so that becomes a part of the equation increasingly. So Spencer, if you could just move along, that'd be great. So today, the focus of it, you'll hear from Sarah and Mark, and they'll talk about how they're meeting the Generation Z technology demands. Specifically, they're going to talk about how they've offloaded ResNet or partnered with Apogee to provide ResNet services, which has allowed them to improve student experience and free up time. Maybe the freed up time is a little more in Mark's area as the CIO of Pitt, but it frees them up for strategic initiatives, and they'll talk about that. And then a lot of campuses, a lot of colleges are interested in the predictability of their budgets and moving from a CapEx kind of a responsibility of periodic substantial investments into more of an OpEx relationships. It gives them the freedom to have high performance service all the time and to manage it. Let us manage it for them that way. But I've asked Sarah and Mark to feel free to go anywhere they want to go. Honestly, these are kind of our focal points, but feel free to go anywhere you want to go in a way that if you think your peers who are attending this webinar may benefit from your stories. So you've got a lot of great experiences that I'm sure they'd love to hear. So if we can then move straight into our the first step before we kick into the first question is we're going to have a quick Zoom poll. If each of you could just take a second to answer what's most important to you in this topic today. You can, if everything is important, put all the above. I just want to make sure that the panelists can hear what you're most interested in, if there's anything specifically. Okay. Well, the two that are rising the highest in terms of interest are all of the above, which is fairly common, and then but the second is actually the details of how student residential experience is being impacted. So through managed services. So I'm confident we can address that. I'm going to end the poll, and we'll move right into our first topic. So the question or the frame here is really about the post-pandemic. We came through 2 years of post-pandemic. I know that to a certain extent we're not through it, but let's suggest for a moment that we're far enough through it that we're getting closer to a new normal. And so I think the first question for Sarah and Mark is, and I'll start with you, Mark, is kind of what role did residential living play during the pandemic, first of all, and how did you guys adapt?
Well, ours is perhaps a bit different from the standpoint that we very early decided that we were going to send our students home. And so, I guess at the beginning of the pandemic, they went on spring break, and we allowed them to come back for assigned days to empty their residence halls of all of their belongings. And so we as a university pivoted to remote teaching, learning, and working, because we didn't have many people except for those necessary just to keep the university's lights on, so to speak. And we did everything from a remote standpoint. But we heard very clearly that students really wanted to return to in-person learning. And we wound up bringing them back the following academic year. But we started later on in the year. So again, we relied heavily on remote learning. The key, though, was to make sure that we had the appropriate service levels in terms of our networks in the dorms. And that's where Apogee played I think a very, very good role in helping us address our service needs across the lay of the land.
Now, the residential experience for you, Mark, I think was, if I remember right, you guys were very committed all the way through, other than that first period where you sent them home. I think you even went out to hotels and maybe even bought a property, right?
Right, that's true. Because of social distancing requirements, we're an urban environment, and so we have a lot of dorms that are high rise, and students are in very close proximity to one another. So to ensure we had the appropriate social distancing, we wound up striking up deals with hotels in the area right around the university and actually on the university campus. One of those properties, which we wound up purchasing to expand our bed count, but there were some challenges in trying to ensure a similar level of service for those students who were in hotel spaces as opposed to in university residence halls. But we were able to work through that.
And weren't some of those students, Mark, on the Pitt side of things, wasn't there a foreign student challenge too that you had to address?
Yeah, but that became a challenge a little later on, and that really was because of constraints in terms of international travel. So we had to maintain our remote footing well into the return to residence halls, and that was a lot of that was outside of our control.
And even your buses, I think we equipped your buses with, you kind of went outside the building structures even to find all sorts of ways, right, to extend the learning environment.
Yeah, again, with an eye towards social distancing and convenience and enhanced services to students, we outfitted all of our shuttles and buses that run around not only the campus, but in the Pittsburgh environment with wireless. And we also moved to a wireless footing in outside areas, again, to maintain social distancing and to give options to students, because you can be outside on a nice day and connect into a classroom remotely.
So it was exciting, I know, for our team to work to kind of cover all the different bases and all the different ways that you encountered, and that we had to, step in and help you. Sarah, how about KU? You've been with us for 12 years. So you had a pre-pandemic relationship, and then through the pandemic, but I think you guys never, you stayed, the resident students stayed in residencies, right?
Yeah, we, so, it's 2 years ago now. It's hard to believe. It goes by fast, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We knew when we had to go to limited operations, and that's what we called it, that we had some students that wouldn't have the capacity to leave our campus and go home and then, transition to an all virtual environment. Our population, while many folks have good internet at home, we've got folks in rural areas, or even in our own county here, there's areas where, you just can't get any internet out, where somebody lives. So we went to limited. A lot of our students went home, 4,200 of them, but we kept about 800 students here through that for the end of that spring semester. And one of the reasons to stay was that you needed to be here in order to continue in your classes virtually. COVID's changed everything for all of us, right? And I think as we, then started looking at what we were going to be able to do for that fall semester, we knew we'd come back in person in some capacity, but we also knew there were a lot of folks that couldn't be here safely for their own health, or they were internationally, had managed to get a flight somewhere and weren't going to be able to get back, but wanted to continue in those online formats. And so for us, we started making sure that, we did all the distancing, all the things. We're lucky. We've got a lot of suites. We've got a lot of private bedrooms. So we were really able to think of those as family units and didn't have to de-densify like some of my colleagues around the country did. But we knew we'd have to have great speeds because students wanted to be here because they wanted that residential experience, even if it meant they were going to be doing online instruction for their classes or had to go hybrid because maybe they became symptomatic and we had to put them into isolation housing. And so really working with Apogee and talking about our ResNet and making sure that we were going to be positioned to be successful. And honestly, I never had to worry about it because our rep, Tricia, was always in communication, but we were preparing for students to be Zooming for class, for hours every day, not just watching YouTube videos anymore, gaming and some of the things they typically were doing in our halls.
Is it fair to say, Sarah, that you're, because you were, I'm going to say fairly far advanced, having done this for 12 years with us, that you were pretty well prepared for? I mean, nobody was prepared for the pandemic, at large, but in terms of providing uninterrupted service, high performance access to digital learning and so forth, was that an issue you didn't have to worry about very much because of what you had done in the past?
Yeah, I would say yes, if I have to answer yes or no. And I would also say that our central IT that does cover the campus then, and really needed to be thinking about those faculty offices and classrooms and speeds and what that looked like for all the graduate assistant TAs in the academic corridor. Those leaders in central IT didn't have to worry about what the res halls were going to do and what the apartments that we have on campus were going to do, because Apogee is just such a respected partner amongst our campus and all of the employees here. So it was great on the calls. I think a lot of my colleagues would say, you remember those daily calls, right? Or twice daily calls about pandemic and what are we going to do and how are we going to make it? Our CIO was able to say, Sarah, is there anything that you need our support for? And I was able to say, Mary, I think we're good. I've talked to Apogee, our speeds are good, and we've got no concerns right now. And so they were able then to pivot to those academic pieces to make sure classroom and course instruction was as effective and successful as possible.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I think just for the benefit of all the attendees that are participating, listening in and watching today, it's probably you've all noted that we've got two completely or quite different perspectives of providing the service. In Mark's case, as the CIO of a large institution, Pittsburgh's taken the approach of IT, making sure that all the residential student experiences are supported. Now we're the partner here providing that with them, but there's IT has a big role or the lead role in that respect. And in the case of KU, the housing organization that Sarah leads is taking responsibility for that. I will say we have no dog in the fight. We are, in terms of those different perspectives, we're agnostic. We aim to support every college in the way they want to be supported and how they work. So I just want to say that up front, that it's just interesting because some colleges lean heavily on housing and some colleges lean heavily on IT. And as you can see, they can both work well. So thank you for that. I think, Spencer, if we can go to the next slide, that would be great. Or the next question. So the next topic is labeled the great enabler. What role does technology play as an enabler of today's residential experience? Maybe just a little context. What I would add here is, what we've seen is a dramatically different use cases and patterns from students. We're seeing things from Pelotons to love lamps. Now that's not anything inappropriate. To pet feeders and light bulbs and home theater systems. There's no sort of end to the possibilities of what students want to kind of have on their network. And so I'm just curious, maybe Sarah, I'll start with you, being in the middle, deep and focused on the resident experience. What do you make of that, and how have those requirements changed, and how have you kept, or collectively us kept, ahead of the curve on making sure that students' needs are met?
Yeah, KU made a really intentional decision to partner with Apogee in order to make sure that we had good, solid wireless coverage in all of our on-campus facilities, and that it didn't. The students that could afford the best buildings or the newer weren't the ones that got a service that others didn't. And so technology really, when we think about it at KU, is just an expectation, and it's a baseline, and you choose to live on campus, and you get this as part of that. You don't have to worry about speeds or gigabytes because we're providing it. So for us, there's really an equity issue and a social justice issue there in a lot of ways, to make sure that it's just something that everybody gets to experience, and you don't have to worry about that utility per se. And so those are some initial thoughts. I think as we think about, the enabler to the residential, and as we've come through COVID, though, a couple years ago, none of us would have thought that dual instruction would be happening, or that, a chemistry lecture that is an in-person class, right, historically would be recorded, or recorded so that students who couldn't be there or were, working or going to school remotely were able to view it later. And that's really become an expectation now. So while we've got in-person classes, those lectures are being recorded or Zoomed, right? So that students can go back and look at it later. Or when they're not, they're feeling better, or different pieces like that. So I think the dual delivery and really what that's done to change the residential experience. Again, mentioned it earlier, students they're doing coursework big time by watching all those videos and participating in online. We're doing Teams meetings, especially because we're transitioned a lot to Teams here. That's how they're engaging with their peers, because it's also more convenient, right? To just jump on a quick Teams call with your with your group instead of having to figure out where to meet up somewhere centrally on campus and figure out transportation there and things. So it's definitely, but it's something we want for our on-campus population, just as the experience and as what you get when you're a student at the University of Kansas.
I really appreciated when you shared the story about your the social justice and the equity as being sort of fundamental to part of the promise or the service that you provide to a student that chooses to be a resident. And I think you said that there's some students that you still get today who don't have any experience being utilizing what we would call we would take for granted as good access. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I mean, it is. And, and they likely had it in their high school. But when they went home, they might not have, again, because of rural areas where there's no fiber, there's no cell signal, anything that gets there easily. And so we do see that it's a small percentage of population, but it's significant. And it's a huge barrier to learning. So we want to remove that because it's hard enough to be a college student, to worry about whether or not you can be on the Zoom, be in the lecture and participating. We want to remove that so that they can be there and be fully engaged.
Cool. Now, one last thing, Sarah, and I'll go to you, Mark, in a second. But you had mentioned this dual learning a couple times, and I think at one point you had shared with me that students are choosing. I'm going to say the professor that maybe they couldn't get in the class, but they're using access now to participate in that prof's course. Is that correct? Did I get that right? Is that part of what they're doing?
It is. I mean, whether or not, some of my partners and, the academic ranks like it. But I know this is not a KU example, but where my son goes to school, the TAs in his chemistry department have actively encouraged folks, go to your in-person lecture. And then if you're not in another faculty member's class, then those are, the ones that are the best a lot of times, watch their lecture too to supplement. And my son's actively been doing that as he's pursuing his engineering degree. And it's helped him tremendously, especially in chemistry and physics. And I know it's happening here at KU as well. And so again, it also just gives the student the opportunity to watch it again, because sometimes you need to see something a couple times, or to go in and talk to the TA, talk to the teaching assistants, or when you're in those small recitation sections, to really get it to all click. And then, again, that wasn't happening, I don't think, pre-COVID at most institutions.
Well, I guess students are, in a resident setting are more inclined to collaborate and talk to each other. So if a real cool lesson or lecture, or a strong lecture gets put together, it's nice that you can, kind of in that community, have it little, kind of quasi crowdsourcing, almost in terms of, giving them access to it. So
yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Yeah.
Cool. Mark, how about yourself? A CEO in Pitt, how do you see the challenges of serving students from the role technology plays for them today, and what kind of any unique things you bumped into, your teams bumped into, that we collectively we've had to step up and address?
Well, sure. I mean, at its most basic level is just that connectivity and access to services is a basic requirement in order to even be in the game. In today's day and age, it's not uncommon for a student to come with upwards of 7 devices per student. All right, and one of the challenges that we often faced is that for a long time we were really CapEx based, and so it was very hard to plan these kind of leaps that you have to make. But we've tried to move a lot of what we do from an IT standpoint to a services base, an OpEx approach, so that you can more effectively plan. And so in the case of us returning to campus, we found that there was an ever increasing demand in many of our residence halls for additional bandwidth, because we had medical students, for example, taking classes out of where they lived. And a lot of what they had to do was high intensity kinds of things. And not just medical students, just across the board from a health sciences standpoint. And so we needed to keep ahead of that expanding demand. And having partnered with, with Apogee in particular, we're able to work with your team in ways that allowed us to kind of crank up, that faucet, so to speak, strategically, because we didn't need the same all the way across the board. But for some of these things that may have had a blip, we were able to very quickly attend to those expanding needs, like the medical students, in a way that made sense and in a way that fit within our OpEx forecasts. So that made a lot of sense.
Just to clarify, Mark, I want to make sure I'm understanding the blip scenario you're describing. So we guarantee. So one of the things we do, or one of the benefits of working with a partner like us to provide the service, is that we have guarantees around service level performance. So if you have a student, if your students, year one are bringing 4 devices, next year they all bring 8. And that drives a spike in volume. Like we're just in there. We need to invest in increasing the capacity because that causes the blip. You get that? Is that the kind of scenario you're referring to?
It's exactly what I'm referring to. Although I'll go a step further, because we're able to work with your team and analyze the data. Getting to various types of services, and we're able to key in on, hey, we need to do something about this particular environment. And so, literally hours after identifying the problems, we're able to bring resources to bear that made the problems a non-issue. And that was done, I thought, very well, because and we're, from my vantage point, it's a bit different than Sarah's, because the residence halls are only one aspect of where we need to deliver services. And so for us not having to worry about those kinds of things allows me to take our PIT resources and apply them. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a PIT service that Apogee is providing to the residents, and we're responsible for the overall performance. But in terms of priority for technological needs, for example, in classrooms, that's ever increasing. Focusing more on the student experience, because we don't view the students' use of technology just purely through the academic lens. I mean, the students are using the technology for their social engagements as well. And so we're paying attention to these evolving needs and in a lot of instances, demands that students have. And we're adjusting our resources and our implementation of new services to react to that. So to be able to pivot our resources away from the day-to-day operations of wireless in the residence halls, and incidentally beyond just the residence halls, has been of tremendous benefit to us in terms of our overall transformation of IT at an institution like Pitt.
Well, thank you, Mark. That's awesome. If I could stick with you and we could move to the third question and topic, Spencer, that would be great. So you started to touch on this, your campus and Apogee and what was the case. Maybe if you could, kind of do a little rewind into the past, maybe, pre-Apogee, and think about kind of what led you to not just where you're at today, but the whole process you went through. As the attendees who are listening in and watching, they're all most likely are potential higher ed or they're higher ed administrators and potential higher ed customers of Apogee's that are considering, like, should we invest, should we consider this? So if you could share, kind of how you got through the decision to have a partner take on what we took on, what your process was, what what things you bumped into, all of that would be, I think, probably helpful for the audience.
Certainly. I'm going to take it beyond, my response will be beyond residence halls. All right.
Yeah,
because as I mentioned, we at Pitt IT, we're on a journey of organizational transformation. And that's what is an IT organization in the 21st century and beyond, in support of a research intensive institution. And in the case of Pitt, a medical and health sciences research intensive environment. And so we're working our way through that. One of the things that we spent some time thinking about is, what is it that we ought to do ourselves? And what are the things that make a whole lot of sense to rely on a service? And going through that exercise, it became very evident that having a very good wireless service in our residence halls, and I'll just focus on residence halls right now because we're still evaluating this for the rest of the campus, is paramount. And given where we want to put our CapEx, we don't want to put it in devices that have a year or two of life in them before you have to be swapping them out, or they just fail, or students make off with them, or any of those mischievous things that can happen in the company of enterprising students. So we went out to an RFI, and based on what we found through the RFI, we went to a formal RFP, and I'm very happy to say that Apogee came out, far and away on top. And so we continue this exercise and looking at what are the things that we ought to do ourselves, and what are the things that we ought to rely on our strategic vendor partners to provide as a service. Again, moving away from CapEx, because before, again, our partnership with Apogee, we were having to go out and buy tons of WAPs and controllers and management systems. And it just was a lot of stuff that wasn't particularly strategic. Very important, but wasn't strategic, like putting more of our resources towards supporting the research enterprise at the University of Pittsburgh. We're over $1 billion enterprise these days. And so there's a lot that's happening there. And how do we think about transforming teaching? And we've seen the pandemic serve as a springboard for accelerating, rethinking the notion of a classroom, which incidentally can be out on the front yard of the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial because we've covered it with wireless. It can be in quarantine housing for students who come down with COVID or other ailments, because COVID's big, but that's not the only problem we got to face into. Or it can be wherever. And we're working through that. What is the best utilization of our space in general at the university, given that we all know that we can work remote, and it makes a lot of sense. And I'll go even a step further. How do we think about the University of Pittsburgh brand beyond the four walls of the campus? You got to have connectivity in order to address those kinds of things. And we too have rural issues, because when you get much outside of Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is a highly rural commonwealth. I was going to say state, but we do have, and Pitt has regional campuses, and we're looking at how best to serve the wireless needs at those regional campuses in concert with our partnership with MetaMesh, which extends broadband connectivity wirelessly into the surrounding communities as a way to address some of these digital inequities and level the digital playing field. And see, those are the things that I think the university is best served for members of my team to be focusing on, driving the strategy, and then relying on highly competent partners to execute and provide the day-to-day management of that strategy.
So teaching and learning and research are the sort of two foundational priorities of the university. You're supporting that. And then we are, by the way, I agree. We wear the Pitt jersey when we're a Pitt. We're Pitt, we're not Apogee. We are part of you, we are you. But in that case, you mentioned that you're looking at, investigating this beyond residence halls as a service. How do you decide whether, kind of what makes sense for you and your organization to lean on someone, like us for what services we provide versus what things are, closer to your vest that are important, more strategically valuable probably is how one way, maybe one way to frame it, that you would want to, concentrate your team and resources on.
Well, for us, it's kind of a fairly simple evaluation. Is there are the things that we have to do because we're in this space, all right? And providing wireless connectivity is one of those things, all right? But does utilizing our resources and our CapEx give us a competitive advantage in terms of attracting, retaining, and graduating the very best students, undergrad through graduate, and retain the very best faculty members? And does it advance their research? All right. And does it enhance the overall teaching and learning environment? And when I look at wireless, the realities are no. I mean, it is very, very important, and no different than the lights. When you walk in your office and you throw the switch, it has to work, and you're shocked if the lights don't come on. I mean, but I don't run a power plant, all right? I rely on those who do the Duquesne light, to provide electricity. So those who's in your wheelhouse to manage and support and gain the vast economies and experience that you've developed, it's in our best interest to rely on those strategic partners to provide those kinds of services. Freeing us up to create high performance computing, storage, AI, machine learning, analytics facilities that support innovation in health, science, and medicine.
So you're moving your team up the value curve in terms of what you're trying to say you want to spend your limited resources and attention on, as opposed to spreading yourself thinly, maybe across some things that are not as high on the value curve. Did you have anybody as your team sort of universally, embraced it, or was it a little bit of work to try and get, kind of everybody, kind of around this idea?
Well, I smile because rumor and innuendo are truly a foe. And the biggest example of that were posts that started showing up on Reddit that indicated that we were taking something away from students, by pivoting to working with Apogee. When in fact, after we got ahead of the rumor and innuendo, we started hearing, good commentary, because we pay very close attention to social media environments and what's being said on those platforms. And after the first couple of weeks and some tweaking, it became really smooth sailing after that.
Well, that's good. I know when you're running IT for a large organization like Pitt, it can sometimes be challenging for individuals who are, technical, who have technical responsibilities or IT responsibilities, to not think of anything that's technology centric as sort of, in their interpersonal responsibilities to provide, versus, kind of figuring out, what to do personally versus what to lean on partners to help with. So, congratulations. Thanks for the opportunity to play that role so far, and appreciate your leadership and innovative thinking on that, Mark. As a CIO, you're leading the way to a large extent.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sarah, how about yourself? Like you, your perspective is probably on this question of, what was the case for Apogee? You probably have to kind of go way back in time, because that was a while ago, but curious to hear, as a head of housing and your perspective on that.
Well, a lot of it was that we didn't have wireless everywhere and we needed it. And as I understand it, the question was posed to central IT: can you do it, and will you do it, and what's it going to cost? And it was like, yeah, no, we've got other priorities, and not sure this is the right, time. And so knowing it was a requirement, even, then in the late 2010s, like 09 ish, they went out with the RFI and all of those things, some of them Mark talked about, and entered into the partnership. So, when I got here in 2017, I was familiar with Apogee because at my last institution, we'd looked at Stream 2 and a couple of other things with our cable there. And so, I got to meet our rep here and understand the history of it. And our contract was coming up to be reviewed, and there was some changes in leadership. And, I was cautious about just saying, okay, we want to renew this or do it again, but also in looking at the speed test and looking at the data, looking at the investment, and then also talking to my partners in central IT, it just wasn't an investment or a switch that they wanted to do at that time. And so we continue our partnership. I agree with everything Mark said about the why. And even on my time is, trying to figure out my deferred maintenance needs and my ongoing, renewal and replacement needs. I don't have to worry about if the wireless access points are, out of whatever. I don't even know the right term, frankly, because it's all contractually there. And Tricia, and who I work with, meet with her monthly as our lead person. She brings stuff to me. She talks about it. It's on our contract of when we should expect those updates as part of the service. And so I think it's important for me to add, Mark said it, and I'm sorry, yeah, Mark said it. The students don't really know it's much different. Like if you live on campus, you know that it's the ResNet there, and you log in differently than when you're in an academic corridor or you're on the Jayhawk network. But we've also transitioned to single sign-on, and so they get logged in, they get everything in their res halls, and then their devices stay connected and they go into Jayhawk. We've made amazing partnerships between our IT help desk and Apogee's. So a student, if they do not follow the instructions and they don't call the Apogee help desk or do the different ways of connecting, and they call Central IT knows that they need to transition that call over to Apogee. And so to make it as seamless as possible in that kind of one KU mode is something we've also achieved here. And so I think those are all reasons why I think it's a great partnership, and very happy that we're continuing with it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Sarah. I think, one of the things I think I've heard you both share in other discussions we've had is that part of the challenge that you either have, had, we hear about the Great Resignation these days a lot, and technical talent, in a university setting is that issue has created some challenges as well. So I'm just curious as relates to maybe sticking with you, Sarah. I think one of the things that you shared in the past was that IT in KU is got their hands full trying to do what they're doing, and so from your perspective, it's they're fine with this being taken care of, and would find it difficult. Is that correct? Did I hear you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that it was in 2018, I believe, that we renewed our agreement. So we were well before COVID, right? And it was all for all the right reasons then. And again, it's something that we're going to continue. But yeah, our staff is stretched everywhere here, just like every place around the country. And IT folks can easily find another job somewhere, is what it appears. And so it's a comfortable relationship for sure, but not comfortable because it's easy. Yes, it's easy, but also because it works and it's effective. And we never get complaints about our speeds in the housing facilities. And if we do, for some reason, it's immediately known and it's immediately addressed. And I've worked places where that wasn't the case. All the students were online, or some show released or something on online, and they were all trying to look at it at the same time, and everything lagged and it was dropping and they couldn't get connected. And it's just not the case. So we're a very satisfied customer, for lack of a better way of putting it, right?
Thank you, Sarah. Mark, how about yourself as a leader of IT? Is the benefit associated with kind of access to another talent pool? Is there another dimension to this that is valuable, or folks should think about, given given the challenges these days in finding, attracting, retaining, technical talent? Is this a sort of one less headache to worry about, knowing you got someone who's responsible for that part of it too?
Definitely, without question. We in fact, towards the beginning of the pandemic, because all of us faced financial headwinds when we faced into the pandemic, the university offered early retirement. and we lost, I believe, 22 people out of IT.
Wow.
Now, what was interesting is that some of those folks really were folks who would have been worrying about the wireless network and upkeep of a lot of the network elements. And we were able to, through our partnership with Apogee and others, weather that storm when it hit us. And we also did some things like we gave people some from professional contracts, so we were able to retain some of the brain drain, but it allowed us to transition. And yes, the simple answer is yes. So that's another reason why we're looking at how do we move our footing to more of a manager of a portfolio of services, and focus laser-like on those things that give us a competitive advantage.
Terrific. Just out of curiosity, I should know this, but I didn't. How big is that? If you lost 22 people, how big was the team? That's a lot of people.
We're north of 320 and growing, because we have a One IT at Pitt initiative underway.
Wow.
So that we can cut down on duplication and associated waste.
That's a big group to manage. Well, terrific. Well, let's bring it home here at the last topic, last slide, Spencer, for the panel anyway. So it's kind of in closing, what advice do you have for campus IT and housing leaders? You can provide whatever additional thoughts you have. I am curious, Mark, you maybe feel free to comment a little bit, educate the audience a little bit about your MetaMesh initiative as well that you brought up. And we're happy to be, I think partnership, partnership comes in lots of different forms. Obviously, we're talking about the sort of things that we're doing together to serve your students, but there's other dimensions to partnership too. So just curious anyway, what advice you have. Feel free to take the floor, Mark, if you don't mind.
Sure. First of all, I think you have to have a really, really strong relationship as an IT leader with your auxiliary services, and at Pitt, housing is considered an auxiliary service, although managed by out of the provost's office. So we gain an awful lot of insights through our relationship with the dean of students and the people who are on the ground in the housing department. And that allows us to stay abreast of what they're hearing from students. So you have to have that really strong relationship. You also have to think about relationships, as Scott was just saying, in fairly broad fashions, because MetaMesh is a nonprofit organization that was largely created out of Carnegie Mellon, but it's a partnership between about 4 organizations, Pitt being one of them. And MetaMesh's goal is to provide wireless broadband to underserved and no-served neighborhoods. Beginning in the Allegheny County region, which is where Pittsburgh is located. But we're doing a test run at our Johnstown campus, which is one of those that are way out there in very, very rural areas. And it's not far-fetched to understand that there are areas where internet is not available like that. People are having to use their cell phones for internet connectivity. And so we're doing a test bed there with MetaMesh at Johnstown to put up towers and repeaters that can reach out into the campus, where we'll reach out into the community, we're going to outfit on a test basis about a dozen homes in the community, and just to demonstrate the viability of the technology. And we'll backhaul through our BTOP provider that they were awarded a Department of Commerce grant to build out networking infrastructure throughout the Commonwealth. That's Kimber, and we'll use Kimber to backhaul this traffic and to an internet drain and provide connectivity to these rural, underserved, and no-served areas. And we hope to continue doing that. And I had some interesting conversations with Scott and the team, and they met MetaMesh, and they've been working together. So that would be an example of benefit through our University of Pittsburgh relationship that extends to the third piece, which is highly important to universities, and part of their mission is outreach and service. So there's teaching, research, outreach, and service. So that really speaks to our improving the environment for those who are within our area.
Thank you, Mark. Great advice in terms of other leaders thinking about what they, what else they may want to consider. Sarah, how about yourself? Can you bring it home for us in terms of what advice you have for either IT leaders or housing leaders? But probably more from a housing leader standpoint, but just curious, parting thoughts?
Well, I think, from my last campus, where I was central IT, provided my service, and then coming here, I mean, don't be afraid to ask for transparency behind what you're paying for. As an auxiliary, I still pay overhead for a few IT things, and some staff support, especially because the different applications that we have and some of the servers, right, that we still use. But to ask and to understand, because everybody's financially trying to figure out how we're going to make this work, and everybody needs more money. So to get that transparency as much as you can, and then to ask the hard questions, because I think what Mark shared and just what I know the experience was here, there is ease when you can do the hard thing and move it, to an expert provider and to somebody who's, their role is higher education and providing the service to your campus. And so in the long run, what's the ROI on that? Because you take staff and you can divert them, as Mark was saying, to other things that are going to support your strategic initiatives. And so, and no, you're not going to get it all done next month or, before fall opening. But if you start the conversations and you can financially get that work through in the next, 12, 18, 24 months, on the other side of that, 12 years later, probably going to be sitting there, hopefully singing the praises and saying why it was the right decision and why you continue to support it.
That's terrific, Sarah. Thank you so much. I realized as you were wrapping there, Sarah, that I failed to mention earlier that if someone had a question, they can hit the Q&A button and they can type a question in. So while I'm wrapping things up, if you did think of a question you would like to ask a panelist, we're probably going to have about 5 minutes. So you can feel free to key it in. And if there isn't anything there, that we'll wrap a couple minutes early. But I do want to move through the last part of this. What I'll say just before we summarize here is that, first of all, it's been a real honor to work with both of your colleges and you individually. I think that, what's interesting about higher ed is every institution, at a certain level, you're all serving students and you're supporting, learning and or higher learning and research and support services, like you mentioned, Mark. But there's uniqueness to every one of you. And I think that, we certainly appreciate the opportunity to work as a partner, not just a vendor, but as a partner, to understand, what we need to provide technically to help, deliver great service to your students and your faculty and administration, but also to find unique ways to collaborate together. So I just want to say that that's an honor, sort of an honor and always a goal for everybody we work with. Personally, I have a lot of background having worked in inner city schools and other places. So the MetaMesh initiative, Mark, I applaud that. It's a really unique initiative to serve the underserved, and so I think really excited to be part of that. That was something you introduced after we had become partners with you. So just in closing here, before we do move to Q&A, if we have time or if we have questions, really our vision, you'll hear more about us expanding, into managed campus IT services and other areas. We provide higher ed, as you've heard today. Our goal is to provide, great higher ed managed technology services. And this increasingly includes things like managed applications, that are sometimes in the data center, sometimes your infrastructure, your non-network infrastructure. We're even exploring, IoT management responsibilities these days, anything that can connect to the network. Like I mentioned, some of the, the Pelotons and the other, things students are bringing to the network, but we think there'll be an increasing role for us to play to help both make that seamless, maybe more valuable, but also more secure. And so together really, and security becomes a part of that, by the way, an important part of our sort of emerging new services. But together we hope that we can deliver more connected and collaborative campuses, with you and serving you. We also think that, as you heard Mark talk in particular today, that freeing you up to work on things that are more strategically important is an important part of a decision to lean on a partner that provides the kind of services we provide, and that then should allow you to drive student enrollment, persistence, and retention, which hopefully takes some stress, reduces your stress levels, so you can, because you're spending more time and attention on your strategic issues. So with that, I think we are going to wrap. I think Spencer, I don't see a question right now. We can give it 30 seconds, but I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Mark and Sarah, first of all, for your terrific examples of leadership in terms of what you're doing to support education in your campuses, and the opportunity to work with you. And I want to thank everybody who's attended today for their time, taking the time to listen to Mark and Sarah, and to see what, hopefully learn something from each of them, and the opportunity to share with you. So with that, I'm going to wish everybody a good rest of the day. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of the week. Go Jayhawks, by the way, Sarah. Good luck.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.